Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grim Flare, and I hope everybody out there is doing very well today. And we are back in the saddle again for more Golgari Midrange and Modern. And the list remains unchanged despite all of the buzz over other technology like Hex Drinker, which I do plan to test on the channel at some point if the buzz does continue. Despite all the different ways and you can take this deck, despite all the various tweaks people are making, I'm seeing all kinds of different directions this kind of core archetype is being pulled in. I still really believe in this list. Now, that's not to say that it's set in stone. It's not to say that there are no possible tweaks that could make it better, but I really believe that a lot of what we have going on here is very, very close to being correct, or is indeed just correct. Or at least it's a very, very nice way to be playing this archetype at the moment. We have pivoted down to 23 lands, partially as the result of an increased presence of 1-drops and of things that cantrip in general, and partially as a result of kind of lowering our curve just a tad. And we've got the new tech, Unearth times 2, Peatland times 2, Plague Engineer times 1, and Collector Oof times 1. All seeming like very good numbers of these cards. I've been very impressed by all of these cards in their own right, and the rest of the deck is tried and true, tested technology. So I'm definitely a fan of this list. I hope you all out there are as well. I know a lot of you are like me. A lot of you are not chasing the latest clickbait, you know. We're trying to really refine the very best lists possible for Golgari Midrange, and that's exactly what we're doing here today. So we're going to play another league. It's going to be in replay form. Lately I've been kind of carving out like 1 hour blocks of time to get games in, so that is not as conducive to the live recorded stuff. So I've just been jamming games where I can, and then knowing that I can always upload them later as a replay if the league is worth showing you, and I believe this one is. So I hope you'll stay with me for this Modern League. And right before we begin, we have 2 brand new Patreon supporters to thank. We have a new Inquisitor by the name of Rocky Niesa, or Nies, or Nice. I'm sure one of those is at least close to correct, so welcome aboard, Rocky. Thank you so much for the support. And we also have Erwin Lopez. Erwin is a member of the Tire List here. Very generous of you, my friend, and thank you so much for your support. Thank you, as always, to all Patreon supporters, and without further ado, let's play some Rock and Modern. On the draw here, my friends, for round 1, game 1, our opponent likes their 7, and so do we. We've got a nice low curve, we've got 2 dual lands, we've got the turn 1 discard effect. Life is good until we see turn 1 Urza's Tower, which is just kind of, you know, the dreaded sight no matter what follows it, especially when the opponent kept 7 on the play in game 1. But they lead on a Relic, which is obviously very, very good against us. So all we can do is Blooming Marsh Inquisition, and we see it's actually Blue Tron. So very interesting, because the opponent just kept a 7 with Natural Tron, which is terrifying, but notably, they cannot actually cast anything in the hand. Blue Tron, for those who don't know, is less dependent upon assembling Tron. They're a lot happier to pick up an island somewhere early in proceedings, exactly because of hands like this. They want to try to actually interact on the stack a little bit early and then take over the game with advantage. Torrential Gearhulk. Chemister's Insight is a card I personally haven't seen before in Blue Tron, but it seems really like a reasonable fit. And yeah, so we get to take away the Condescend, and then, you know, right now the opponent's hand doesn't do anything, but we're sure that will change. We draw Collective Brutality. That's a good spell against the deck, and it's a good time to use it. But I believe it to be correct to play a threat. We've just got a clock. We've just got to get the engine going, the card selection engine. We're not going to really get Delirium anytime soon against that Relic, but that is what it is. It's pretty hilarious. The opponent, again, turn 3 Natural Tron on the play, and all they can do is go tutor up an island with their Expedition Mat. Pretty amusing. That's kind of one of the foibles of Blue Tron, I suppose. It's got its strengths and weaknesses, of course, relative to stock Tron, Green Tron. We're going to go ahead and get in with the Flare. with the ability on the stack will fetch, and they'll relic us in response. Of course, we want to do that. If we plan to fetch at all, we want to do it before this trigger resolves so we don't ruin our own manipulation of the top deck. And we see Swamp, Trophy, Inquisition. Well, Inquisition could very well whiff. As far as we know right now, it will. They just have one unknown in hand. So I believe it to be correct to bin that, especially because we have Collective Brutality. And then we will go ahead and use the Brutality because we know it's going to be good. And our Inquisition would have whiffed, so that decision pays off. But the opponent has a Factor Fiction, which is another really good draw spell. So they've got all the 2-for-1s in hand. I think we've got to take Factor Fiction. Not only is it kind of inherently the best card, but of course, Jumpstart. It's never great to discard a Jumpstart card because they can flash it back, basically. So I believe that to be pretty clearly correct. And, the opponent just remaining disciplined with the Relic, which is going to make our Flare clock a lot slower, which I believe is probably just correct for them anyway. We see a couple Swamps. We knew about one of them. And a Tarmogoyf. We've got kind of a clunky hand, we've got enough threats. Goyf is obviously really good against Tron, but not so much if they're sitting on a Relic. So I bin the Goyf too, we'll leave the land on top. That allows us to just finally hit our 4th land drop if we want to, or, next turn no matter what, we can hit that 4th land drop, and that lets us go Tracker into land if that seems correct, or just have more mana for these types of effects. We will play the Skoos because they're starting to show that they're close to getting these graveyard effects online, Chemister's Insight being one of them. Now, they can cast this from the graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs, right? So, definitely could have been a line to hit that there, but here's what I'm thinking. Yeah, they've got double blue now, so Torrential Gear Hulk is online as well. So rather than going shields down against the Gear Hulk, I just passed through the turn, kind of like playing it against Snapcaster Mage in that regard. So now that we have full mana open and trophies in hand, we're going to attack, really hoping that they just kind of flash in the Gear Hulk to try to block, right? Because then we get to do everything we want as far as playing around that card goes. But the opponent, again, remaining very disciplined. So we get to connect again. Our clock is getting there. We've been a couple lands that we don't really need, and leave Unearth on top. It's just a nice mana-efficient play next turn. Lets us continue going wide. So we're passing because, as nice as Tracker into land is, now that they have Gear Hulk mana and the Jumpstart card in the graveyard, we just kind of need to leave all of these effects open. And it's also worth noting that I am not trophying them off of Tron aggressively, because right now the blue cards are what's beating us, and they have the mana to more or less hardcast all of these blue cards, or at least they're very close to doing so. So instead I'm just kind of competing over their effects. Unfortunately for us, they have another Chemister's Insight out of hand, which is probably just going to kind of overload us. So we'll respond by trying to eat this one. The opponent will, in response, jumpstart it. Sure. Then this is a decent window to trophy them off of Tron. In response, they will crack Relic. So graveyards are totally emptied. The stack is huge. Really interesting turn. And now that they've used up a lot of their blue cards and drawn a bunch of other cards, now's the time to take them off of Tron, because we don't want them to be able to cast like 3 or 4 spells in one turn, right? And I believe it also to be correct while they're tapped out to eat that last Insight. We're not worried about the Gear Hulk this turn because the graveyards are totally empty, so it kind of worked to our benefit that they aggressively relicked there, but it was a really interesting turn regardless. The opponent does not reassemble Tron, they just only have another island to play, another Relic, which is very annoying, and then they will follow up with a 2/2 Walking Ballista, which will trade with our Scavenging Ooze. So yeah, it's a pretty good situation for the opponent there. Grimflayer is going to get in. We're going to see what happens with our card selection here. So Field of Ruin, Blooming Marsh, Tarmogoyf. Another really interesting choice here. I felt pretty free to bin the Goyf because we do have Unearth. And I like Field of Ruin here, just continue developing our mana. And of course, setting them further back on Tron. Now that they have all these blue lands, that's definitely a relevant thing to do. And we're going to force the Relic Crack here. I kind of am just like planning to power through their effects to the best of my ability. So I like being able to resolve the tracker. I don't mind the card disadvantage of trading with Unearth there because now I am just trying to end the game as quickly as possible. They don't have Tron, but they have 7 lands naturally. They have a fistful of cards. We're not probably going to outvalue them anymore, so I'm happy to force that Relic Crack under my own circumstances. But, and then of course we play the tracker because we know the Field of Ruin's on top. This has them on a 2-turn clock as things stand. Still got a trophy in hand, still got a decay, ways to interact with things they could have. And the opponent's got a Cyclonic Rift. Well, we can't interact with that. All we can do is crack the clue before it gets bounced, right? So that's what we'll do. And we find a Liliana of the Veil, so really interesting. Do we redeploy a threat, or do we go on the Liliana plan? And here, open question, right? Open question, but I chose to go on the Liliana plan, and I believe Abrupt Decay is, at this stage of the game, the worst card in our hand. So there we have it, but it's been a super interesting game. Lots of really meaningful decisions right out of the gates when I'm not even warmed up. So, of course, there might be some arguments for doing other things at various points. I will be happy to hear those. The opponent's got an Ugin, which is a little bit terrifying, but the opponent is deciding to basically tick up toward alt. So instead of just minusing to get rid of our Liliana, they're just going to bolt her, which actually works fairly well to our advantage here, because we get to keep her around, we get to get a card out of their hand, which, you know, clearly they knew that was coming, they feel able to handle that, but still feels alright. And then we've just got a perfect turn because we drew that Blooming Marsh, so we get to go tracker, into land making a clue, and then we trophy away the Ugin. So all of a sudden, our position has actually went from good to a major setback with that Cyclonic Rift to good again. So the opponent's got Expedition Map, lets them reassemble Tron, and Thirst for Knowledge. So the parade of card advantage just continues. Card advantage, card selection. Opponent's seeing a lot of their deck, and they actually have to pitch a couple more card advantage and card selection spells. And then they're going to pass to us. They've still got that Gear Hulk in hand. We draw Unearth. Unearth is, it's interesting here. We're going to first try to make another clue. We're going to field them in our main phase, make sure we get our clue value if it's available to us, and to take them off of Tron mana. Like, we're going to force them to take actions now, or we can pass to the next phase and their floated mana goes away, right? The opponent's got a Nimble Obstructionist, so they cycle the Obstructionist away to counter the Field of Ruin activation. That's pretty interesting one. So, unearthing the Flayer here is the proactive thing to do, and it also allows us to have yet another asymmetrical effect with Liliana, which is really nice. Or is it? Because the opponent's got a Repeal, so their last couple cards in hand have just been absolutely perfect. Obstructionist cycling into Repeal, very, very good. So with Lily's ability on the stack, we're going to crack a clue, see if we find anything we'd rather pitch than the tracker. We draw Field of Ruin, very interesting, and, definitely there's an argument for keeping that over the tracker, but in the end of the day, I decided to just keep the tracker. Opponent plays an Academy Ruins and passes, so the Academy Ruins was the top deck. Once again, this Torrential Gear Hulk is still in their hand, and this is an insane top deck. Like, they have Expedition Map in the graveyard right now. That's about it for artifacts, but of course they can buy back the Gear Hulk. So, definitely feels bad. I'm going to just force the Gear Hulk out of their hand on my own terms, and now I'm punished for pitching the field because they top deck the Academy Ruins, so lots of little things just lining up against us at this stage of the game. Obviously, we could have +1 the Liliana, but I like doing it here again on our own terms, because now we can Edict the Gear Hulk, And then they just get the Gear Hulk, they flash back a Factor Fiction for free, and look at this pile. Like, they get another Factor Fiction, Ugin the Ineffable, Urza's Mine, Talaria West. And there's also Emrakul, the Promised End, so them casting Emrakul is just going to be game over, as far as I can tell, so I think we've kind of got to put it on its own, and then they just get a casual draw for, with our Thoughtseize still on the stack. And they're going to cast another Factor Fiction, Repeal, Remand, Map, Power Plant, Island. So I just split the piles pretty evenly here. Lots going on here, lots to do. They take the Repeal pile, they'll repeal our Flare, and then we Thoughtseize away the Worm Coil Engine because we're just trying to stay ahead on board, trying to keep answering the board, and eventually, some way, somehow, fight through all of that insane value that they just had. And, on top of everything, they have exactly enough mana left to buy back the Worm Coil Engine with Academy Ruins, so it's a really, really impressive back and forth in this game. Both decks doing a lot of work, but the opponents just got everything. Ugin to kill the Tracker, Worm Coil Engine. We draw Nurturing Peatland. Yet again, we get it to +1 the Lily on an empty hand, so Peatland was a pretty good draw, and we get that island out of their hand. Unfortunately, Peatland just finds us another Peatland. End step, the opponent buys back the Torrential Gear Hulk, and the inevitability is now well and truly upon us, so I'm just going to hit play here. Opponent's Worm Coil is coming across trying to end the game. We're going to take the hit, we can afford to take a couple hits. We're just trying to accumulate resources, not attacking because their life total is really high. We don't want to, they get value out of the Spirit, blah, blah, blah. Take another hit, and the opponent is just very, very far ahead now. This Academy Ruins loop with all the mana and all the other 2-for-1s, just a little bit too much for us to take. So, basically at this point, we're continuing to do pretty well. We're continuing to find action, but they just have a lot of inevitability. So, drawing the Liliana, the second Liliana, makes me want to try to chew through the board. So, we go Edict, we go Push. They get a lot of value out of this stuff, no question about it. But then we get another Liliana. We Edict away the Worm Coil Engine. And then we just still have to play defense because we're at 3 life, and we just hope that they don't see the line. But they see the line, so Ugin the Ineffable kills a creature, and they have exactly lethal. So I did power through those turns at the end there because this was a league with a lot of really interactive games. I don't want the league to go overly long, and after a certain point, the decisions that we made, like with the piles, when they go back-to-back, they go Gear Hulk into Factor Fiction, into Repeal, into Academy Ruins all on the same turn, we're just not beating that. So I did power through those turns a little bit quickly, but as you can see, it was a really intense game, really well played by the opponent, really interactive back and forth, and very, very interesting. I just didn't see the need to dwell too long on those decisions after the opponent basically turned the corner on us. So Blue Tron, you saw it early on. They had natural Tron, very good starting hand. They just lacked blue. They found a map to get blue. They found a lot of the good stuff at the right time, but they still gave us a window to really win the game. We were close. We were very close. Didn't quite manage it, and that said, I think our deck's performance was really good here. This felt really good for a Game 1 display. I continue to really like how the list performs, but it was not good enough here in Game 1 against Mono Blue Tron. So let's figure out how to sideboard against this deck. Alright, my friends, so against Mono Blue Tron, a lot of the principles overlap with Green Tron and how we side against that deck, but a lot of them do not. So the way I see it, obviously attacking their land base is still paramount, and Choke is a good companion to Fulminator Mage in that regard. So I consider, the Choke as much of a slam dunk as the second Surgical Extraction would be against regular Tron. Collector Oof is really good against both Tron variants. Oof definitely comes in. And Duress is absolutely great because it's going to be able to take away all of their permission spells or their Planeswalkers or artifacts, you name it. It can take it away. Collective Brutality is a really good card too, but as you can see, we already have a lot of cards to bring in, and it's just a little bit worse than Duress. We've already got one main deck, so this is kind of the second tier of effects. I think the second Surgical Extraction is very playable, but again, it's a matter of slots. It's a matter of what we really have space for. Liliana the Last Hope is a lot better here, a lot more reasonable here than she is against regular Tron. Obviously, the loop with Fulminator is live, and that's cool, but and the fact that they are playing permission spells, we're more likely to have a creature get countered and buy it back. That's all reasonable, but so I think these 10 cards are all very playable. But these 7 are the ones we definitely have to make room for, and then from there we've kind of got to figure things out. So, in terms of what comes out, well, that's a really, really interesting question as well. And I think the 4 Fatal Push are the only obvious slam dunk, because you look at all these other cards, there's an argument for all of them. Abrupt Decay is good. It is a good card despite missing a lot against Green Tron, because just like killing Oblivion Stones and maps and relics and stuff early on when you have a good window to do it is really nice, and Walking Ballista, things like that. I think it's a little less good against Blue Tron, but the same principle still applies. Nile Spellbomb, you saw they play Gear Hulk, they play the Jumpstart spell, they play Academy Ruins. It's a cantrip, it clears out their graveyard, it's definitely not bad. Unearth, again, just like Lily the Last Hope, we can buy back countered creatures, or, of course, we can just unearth our Fulminator, which is amazing. Scavenging Ooze, a little bit of a weak threat, but again, it's a creature that gets busy with the clock, and that can attack their graveyard. Tireless Tracker, very, very decent in the matchup, but maybe a little slow to get going, and a bit of a non-bow with our collector oof. So when you're bringing in the oof, it's always worth at least considering whether that makes you want to kind of, if Tracker is a borderline card, maybe you side out a Tracker, so the non-bow is less of an issue. So as you can see, all of these cards could just easily stay in, but we've got to make some room, and if you want to bring in these cards, we've got to make even more room. So I'll show you kind of what I think the optimal conservative sideboarding is, and that would be to trim away on 1 Abrupt Decay, 1 Unearth, and then either 1 Spellbomb or 1 Scooze. So it would look like this, or it would look like this, and I think that's totally reasonable to just say these cards are out. This is our... Whoops. What did I do? Yep, so these cards are out, this is our 60, or this is our 60. However, if you want the second Collective Brutality, if you want the second Surgical Extraction, again, worth considering the Last Hope, but maybe it's just too much in this deck. I think these are both pretty reasonable as well. This would be a little bit more aggressively teching against certain aspects of their deck. And at that point, maybe we do just go down on threats a little bit more and trim the Nile Spellbomb. Or you could just say, and it's worth noting that Spellbomb is a bit of a non-bow with oof as well, so maybe that's just correct. Or maybe we just leave in 1 more threat and just play without Unearth and just give up the Fulminator synergy. So you guys know me, I like to hedge. If we took the more conservative line, it would look something like this. But in any case, the sideboarding here is a lot less cut and dry than it is against Green Tron. So really use this as more art than science and apply these principles to your own 75, because it's going to be very different based on your exact configuration. But as long as you're going heavy on Fulminator, I do think Choke is really good, and you're leaning heavily on just cards that are universally awesome, you should be pretty well figured out against this deck. Okay, here for game 2 on the play, and our hand has got a pretty nice curve. We go Inquisition into Oof, into either Choke or Tracker. We don't have double black, but we don't need it right now. The hand's a definite keep, it's just that the double forests are awkward. We are not disrupting their lands at all, but hopefully between our other forms of disruption we can get there. And right away we whiff. We see the opponent kept a 6-land hand with an Ugin the Ineffable, which coincidentally costs 6 mana, so sure, you got us. Oh, feels so bad. I truly hate whiffing on the discard, but we know the opponent's probably not doing anything early, and yet they rip Expedition Map right off the top. So before Modern Horizons, my friends, this would tilt us. This would tilt us a little bit, because our Inquisition whiffed, and then they drew the absolute best card to get things going. However, the oof comes to the rescue. Oof is the noise that the Tron player makes when that card hits the table. Turn 2 on the play, because it's oof. It's like getting hit in the stomach, right? So we're shutting off the map, and as far as we know, we're shutting off really anything. That's the only action they had. So still no double black. Still don't need it. So what do we do here? Do we like Tracker or do we like Choke? Well, I went with the Tracker because, number one, I would be a little less heartbroken if it did get remanded or, mono leaked or something. Not that this deck probably plays mono leak, but you never know. And number two, while we've got them locked out, while the Oof is around, we are just trying to clock as quickly as humanly possible. So, opponent plays the power plant, they'll pass back to us. We're hitting for 5. No land is a little bit rough. A double black spell that we can't cast is a little bit rough, so all we can really do is try to jam another threat. Now, jamming the Tarmogoyf would have made this into a 2-turn clock, so that was a real consideration, but the opponent's continuing to develop their mana. I think being on the play, it is nice to try to resolve the Choke, because now they're at the stage where they do probably have to start tapping for things to stay alive, whether or not we play the Tarmogoyf. So the Choke resolving is big game. The opponent will use their Tolaria West to tutor for an Urza's Mine, so they're going to have Tron next turn, and we draw Inquisition, so we're kind of at their mercy. Most Tron payoffs will not get hit by Inquisition. So, for that reason, despite the fact that Inquisition into Goyf would have been a really nice turn otherwise, we are pretty much priced into trophying away a Tron land, and I think we're supposed to do that before they get to untap, just to be absolutely certain we're playing around anything they could have in the form of permission. We hit the tower because we know they have a second copy of Power Plant in hand, so they go Mine Pass, and we finally hit another land. Still can't cast the Liliana, but we're making a clue that, there's the non-bow rearing its ugly head. But obviously that non-bow is a small price to pay for the power of Collector Roof. Shutting off this expedition map, even if that's all it's doing, it's still been so important. Plus, of course, the clock that it brings is pretty nice as well. Opponent's got a remand, so we kind of turned on their remand by casting Inquisition, but I still believe that was correct, and that's another land that doesn't untap, so it's not like they kind of stone rained themselves, at least for a turn, to do so. And we might as well follow up with the Goyf, because even if they go tower, even if they rip tower off the top, they can't play Ugin. So going as wide as possible against other Tron payoffs seems correct, and the opponent does not have anything, and they just scoop it up. So we played Collector Oof, turn 2 on the play. We attacked for 2, 4, 6, 8 by turn 6. So Collector Oof, rather like Dark Confidant, we've seen Dark Confidant, if he's just uncontested, getting in for 6, 8, 10 damage while accruing card advantage is awesome against decks that don't pressure your life total and cannot answer the board. Same exact principle applies here with the Collector Roof. Shutting off that expedition map, getting in for 8 damage. What more do you want? What more do you want from this, guys? So, of all the New Horizons tech, this one has been the most camera shy thus far. We just haven't been facing the decks where we bring him in mostly. That's been the issue, but here we are, first time really needing him, and he shows up in our hand, turn 2 on the play, really helping us win this game. So absolutely awesome. Ringing endorsement for the Collector Roof, and we get one back against Tron. Much more straightforward than Game 1 was, but we've still got to win the Game 3 if we can, so let's check that out. Alright, my friends, the opponent will mulligan, and that's a relief because these Tron decks keeping 7 all 3 games is a little rough. We need to see at least one mulligan to feel great about proceedings, right? So the opponent will mulligan, and I think we're actually supposed to keep this now. This hand needs a 3rd land. We're not doing anything until we hit a 3rd land, but on the draw, statistically, we should. We are, with a 2-land 7 on the draw, we have a 40% chance to hit a land on the first turn, and the number goes up every turn that we fail to do so for the following turn. So it is statistically sound to keep a 2-lander and assume we're going to hit the 3rd land by turn 3. Should really happen most of the time. Of course, ideally we want to hit it sooner than that, but we do. So we go Forest. The opponent went Urza's Mine into Expedition map. we go Swamp Pass, having drawn the forest. So the good news is that we have hit our third land rather. The bad news is that the opponent has turn 3 Tron ready to roll with plant into Expedition map. So we cannot afford to play the Tarmogoyf. We have to trophy away a land. It always feels bad to trophy away the land when you have other ways to disrupt Tron, but it's just too slow on the draw. But what are you going to do? At least we have that option, right? So we'll pass. We'll wait for the opponent to make a decision on the Expedition map, and once they do, might as well just hit it now. We're not gonna get them. Blue Tron plays a ton of basics, so there's no point waiting to draw step. We'll just hit it now. They tutored the tower. They play the tower. And it's back to us. So, obviously a really interesting decision here. We could run out the Field of Ruin, pass, and then field them on their turn just to really be safe. The higher risk, but higher reward line is to go for the Fulminator Mage. And against Bluetron, I actually believe it to be correct to just go for the Fulminator Mage here, especially on the draw. Like, if they're just kind of curving out ahead of us, even though we're disrupting Tron along the way, it's a little bit rough. So we're going to risk the counter magic and go for the Fulminator Mage. Remember, they did mulligan. They did have natural Tron, not natural Tron, but 2 Tron lands plus map. So it would really be asking them to have a perfect hand, basically, if they have counter magic here and then a payoff next turn. And Tron next turn. So all things considered, I think taking the acceptable risk for Fulminator was acceptable, and it does resolve. We wait for the opponent, see if they're going to tap on our turn for any reason. They don't, so then on the upkeep we're going to go ahead and Stone Rain. And the opponent's got another power plant, so they would have reassembled Tron with 8 mana, so I'm very glad we did that. Again, obviously Field of Ruin could have taken them off of it, right? But I like our line there. So we're going to actually play the field now, and we're going to main phase it. We're going to main phase it because we have a follow-up play to make. So the opponent will float mana, and then we're going to leave the phase, or attempt to pass priority to the opponent, and then the opponent will use that floated mana for a Chemister's Insight. So that's some nice value that they get there. They get to cast a 4-drop on our turn 4, even though we Stone Rained them. So that's one of the perils of Field of Ruin, but I still believe it to have been correct, and because we've just gotta use the field this turn, and we don't want to just do nothing else. So we've got an open window. Do we play the Goyf or the Oof? Well, I chose to play the Oof. The Oof is going to shut off a lot of their otherwise good plays here, whether it be maps to continue curving out and reassembling Tron, or just kind of the mid-range, mid-costed value plays like Walking Ballista, Relic of Progenitus, things like this. And the opponent does not have another land drop, so they're just passing. Our Oof is going to lead the charge. Our clock is starting on turn 5 here instead of on turn 3, so a little bit slower this time around, but once again, I'm just kind of deciding to make them have counter magic. We don't need to field aggressively this turn anyway, so I believe Tracker to be the correct line here, and they don't have the counter magic, so we get to go Tracker into a land drop. And the opponent is then tapping out for, flashing back the Chemister's Insight, pitching a Relic, which is indeed shut off by our Oof. And, of course, we've got the non-bow again, but that's alright. If they ever deal with our Oof, we'll have ways to keep finding action, and in the meantime, we can just use our 2 mana to play a Tarmogoyf, which would have been correct anyway. So the opponent... Back to the opponent. They haven't made a land drop yet. Tapping, untapping, tapping again, and they will repeal the Goyf. Unfortunate for the opponent, still no 5th land, and they've got to ditch yet another dead relic. So you can imagine how good it would have been if, for the opponent, if we had played Tarmogoyf after we fielded instead of the Oof, because then they just are happy to cash in their relics, looking for more land drops, keeping our Goyf a total non-factor in the game. But instead we've got the Oof totally hosing the relics and attacking as a bear. Very, very nice, my friends. So here we go, swinging for 5. And again, no ability to crack a clue. No great play here, no Liliana, no Fulminator, but I guess we're going to have to settle for Grimflayer and Tarmogoyf, just going really, really wide. And to be fair, the opponent doesn't really have a way to punish us, so they won't have Tron next turn, so no Ugin, no overloaded Cyclonic Rift, so this is actually quite good. And then the opponent's got a really nice way to, in theory, stabilize, which is a hard-cast Batterskull, but we have the answer to it. So let's just Inquisition just to make sure everything's kosher. We see a really good hand. But frankly, what we do there does not matter much besides, just making sure there's absolutely nothing that can get us, because we have Pulse for the Batterskull. It's going to get Grimflayer Delirious and grow the Goyf to a 5/6, which, hey, look at that. 5, 10, 14. Well, we've got just about exactly lethal, and that's going to do it. So, what can I say, my friends? Collector Oof. Awesome turn 2 on the play, and awesome turn 4 after Disruption, as it turns out. Awesome at many, many stages of the game. Obviously gets just generally a little bit worse against the Tron decks as the game goes on, but even then it's shutting off a lot of, against Green Tron, a lot of the eggs that can keep digging them to payoffs. It's shutting off a massive Walking Ballista's activated ability. It's just really, really nice here. So Collector Oof gets the thumbnail treatment this week, and you just saw why. He just won us games 2 and 3. Or played a significant role anyway in winning 2 and 3 against Tron after a really interesting, really close Game 1 loss. So we never want to see Tron right away in a league. At least I never really do. But we took him down here, and it was really good games, really well played to the opponent. Feels good, my friends. Let's go on to round 2. Okay, so once more on the draw, once more our opponent will keep 7, and once more we're keeping a 2-lander with a very low curve, with one exception. So lots of parallels to round 1, and the parallels continue because it's a turn 1 Urza's Tower again. So we're running the Tron Gauntlet, it seems, today, and the opponent's got Tower into Sphere. And in a replay, again, of last round, we go Land Inquisition, and we see the opponent has Karn the Great Creator, and they have 4 total lands, but no Tron assembled quite yet, and a Sylvan Scrying, which will go by the wayside. We'll take it away. We're passing back, and the opponent goes Power Plant, Cracking Sphere, and finding Ancient Stirrings. Very nice find from the opponent. Stirrings will tutor up a Walking Ballista, and it's back to us. So we can definitely take the Ballista out of their hand right now with a guaranteed Inquisition. And that's actually very tempting, because Inquisition can become dead, sooner rather than later against Tron. It's still a good card against them, because disrupting them early in any way you can is so crucial. But, it can whiff after a certain stage a fair amount of the time. So very tempting to Inquisition there, especially because we can be mana efficient and play Spellbomb, but the clock is paramount, so obviously playing Goyf there is really viable too, and that's what I chose to do. Opponent runs out the Tower, so no Tron land has been found, no missing Tron land, that is, and they do play out the Ballista, so we missed our window to Inquisition it, but that's fine. Liliana the Veil, very nice draw. Now, taking down is not good against Walking Ballista, because of course that's just a trade. They'll ping in response, so instead we go on the plus plan, which is really nice. We get rid of our Inquisition that way, and I believe that to be correct. Obviously, you could still hold it to keep the hand more diverse in terms of what it can do, but both of these spell bombs represent a redraw, even though they're pretty bad in the matchup, so I did decide to go ahead and pitch the Inquisition, and the Goyf begins the clock, hitting for 3. Sanctum of Ugin is what the opponent pitched, so clearly they're continuing to hit lands in general. And sure enough, there's Urza's Tower number 3 into Karn the Great Creator, everybody's favorite addition to Modern from War of the Spark. This card is still just like absolutely insane in terms of what it actually does. But no, it's no Mycosynth Lattice Lock for us in our future. It is Sorceress Spyglass. And the opponent will sit behind their Walking Ballista in an attempt to protect the Karn. However, we have drawn a Fatal Push, so let's go ahead and run out a Nile Spellbomb, even though it's shut off for now. We're just kind of, doing things in an order that doesn't really matter. We could have pushed first. They're still going to ping us, doesn't change anything. Then we'll pitch the other Spellbomb. It's just definitely correct to keep hold of the tracker here. And then we will get in with the Goyf. The opponent has pitched a Karn Liberated, and our Goyf will take care of the smaller Karn. Karn the Great Creator. Now, just because I'm interested in maybe making a 4th land drop, I'll cantrip with a Spellbomb here. And technically, maybe I should have, attacked Karn off the table first, then cantripped, and then ticked Liliana up, just to have a more, more information with what to do. But we might have kept the Scoos anyway, so it's not that big a deal, but the sequencing there was, could perhaps have been more optimized. In any case, the opponent was always going to go on the Spyglass plan this turn, because Liliana the Veil is just a very hard card for them to beat. And, pretty nice draw, not gonna lie. Pretty nice draw of Maelstrom Pulse, so we'll just pretty clearly take care of the Spyglass, tick the Liliana up, pitch the Scoos, and get them down to 1 card in hand. Another Karn Liberated goes by the wayside, so all their payoffs just having to be pitched. And the Tarmogoyf is a 5/6. The opponent's got no 5th land, no play. Very, very good for us. And once again, we draw something that we're pretty happy to pitch, which is Fatal Push. It's going to grow the Goyf to a 6/7, so that actually puts them on a 2-turn clock from only the Goyf, but of course Tracker is going to join the party as well. So a 3rd Karn Liberated gets pitched, and we are presenting lethal with a Liliana of the Veil about to ultimate. So the opponent is really on the ropes. They top deck a Chromatic Star, so it's a Desperation Dig from the Star, and they find an Urza's Mine, so they find Tron. At long last, Tron has been assembled, and what is their payoff? The last card in hand is a Wormcoil Engine. So, this is Tron for you. We're disrupting them, we're clocking them, they're kind of doing nothing, and then all of a sudden, last gasp effort, they find Tron and still have enough mana after those cantrips to play their payoff cards. So we draw Unearth. Think for a moment, my friends, about what you would do. Obviously, edicting there and keeping the Liliana around is an obvious line. We have Unearth to cycle or to buy back the Scoos, but you know what I did? I went ahead and ulted the Lily and said, look, the opponent's at 6 life. They obviously have to keep the Wormcoil Engine around, and we can beat a Wormcoil Engine now that we've drawn Unearth, so we can just quintuple Stone Rain them. They go from having they have triple tower, so that's 13 mana. They go from having 13 mana to having 0 mana. Now, admittedly, they still have a Wormcoil on the field, but we have inevitability with this Tireless Tracker. We're drawing so live. Every draw in our deck is basically good at this point, besides maybe discard, but even discard will be fine because they're not casting anything anytime soon. So we send in the Goyf, trading away with the Wormcoil, and then we just unearth the Goyf back. And now, yes, the opponent has technically stabilized a little bit, and they immediately draw an Urza's land, so that's, they do that a few more times and they hit payoffs, we're in trouble, but we just have the inevitability, and right away we get a land, which is nice. We'll crack a clue because, Fatal Push is a live draw here. And we see another swamp, so here's the inevitability really kicking in. We'll send in the Goyf, they've got to trade it away, and that's totally fine with us, because we just, again, we've reset them basically back to turn 1, and now we've got a Tireless Tracker. We're continuing to hit land drops. Make a land drop, crack a clue, we find Liliana of the Veil, beautiful, beautiful draw, and the opponent will scoop with her on the stack. So, really interesting decision there to... I think to ult with the Liliana. I think if people were kind of on autopilot mode, a lot of people might have said, yeah, we'll just edict away, and then we still got the Liliana around. But the problem with that is you're then soft to other bomb top decks because they were Tron line. They had all the mana they could ever possibly need, right? So ulting allows them to keep the Wormcoil around, but at the expense of their entire land base. And then again, The power of Tarmogoyf being a 6/7, not only clocking them and presenting lethal to the point where they had exactly one turn to stabilize, and then they did, but also the power of the new technology Unearth, allowing us to make that decision and be rewarded for it. Buying back the 6/7 Goyf, and Tracker and Liliana also playing really nice roles there. So that was a feel-good win against Tron. Hot on the heels of beating the cousin Blue Tron. We beat the big brother. I guess let's rephrase that. We beat the little brother in round 1. We beat Blue Tron, and now we beat Green Tron here in game 1, round 2. But we still have to win the series, my friend. So let's see if we can do that, and I'll show you how I sideboard with my new build. Okay, so like I said in round 1, there is a lot of overlap, but a lot of important distinctions in terms of how you should sideboard against these two Tron variants. So against Green Tron, Fulminator Mage is even better than it is against Blue Tron, and Surgical Extraction is even better, so we just definitely want all 5 of these cards. Collector Oof, we know and love this guy in the Tron matchup. Big appeal to playing it in the first place. He'll come in, and Duress is still very, very nice here. So these 7 cards for sure come in. And then Kalitas Trader of Get. A lot of reasons you would just overlook this card and say, I don't really want it here. He's clunky. He's not that impressive of a clock in this type of matchup where you're kind of racing. And, you know, the lifelink is not relevant. The zombies are not the most relevant. So why do we like Kalitas? Well, one, very innocuous seeming but relatively important reason is that his replacement effect, the Exile effect, is going to shut Wormcoil Engine's Death Trigger off, which can be very, very impactful. Obviously, our plan is to disrupt them with cards like Fulminator Mage, Field of Ruin, Assassin's Trophy. And if we successfully execute that, then we have to be able to slog through all of their 5-6 drop value plays that are hard cast, like Thragtusk and Wormcoil Engine. Kalitas can actually help do that to a significant degree. So I put him in his own category because, like, these 7 cards you just have to bring in if they're in your deck. Kalitas you can kind of consider in the second tier, but with our current build, you know, obviously Fatal Pushes still can come out pretty freely. Nile Spellbomb just does very, very little, if anything, against Green Tron, so 6 pretty free cuts. And then, you know, trimming away a Skoos. Collective Brutality is a lot worse against Green Tron. It's pretty dead, except maybe if you're on the play taking a Scrying. Neither of these cards are very, very impressive, so I'm pretty happy to play Kalitas over the first Brutality or the second Skoos, and I think that's, like I said, with Blue Tron, it's a little bit murkier, it's a little more art than science. With Green Tron, with the arguable exception of Kalitas, it is pretty straightforward how to sideboard against a deck like this. So here's how we were set up. Let's go check out Game 2. Okay, on the draw here against Tron, and our hand has a whole lot to like. We go right now, turn 1 Treetop, turn 2 Dark Confidant, turn 3 Fulminator, turn 4 Field of Ruin. We've been drawing 2 for a couple turns. So this hand is absolutely spectacular, despite being a little bit light on gas overall. Like, these are 2 of our best cards to have if we are light on gas. The only problem with this is it cannot beat Natural Tron on turn 3 into a payoff. Just not going to happen. But I think it's still a keep. We still have 2 draw steps toward an Assassin's Trophy if they have that. But basically right now we're just making them have that. If they don't have that, we are in business. We're really in business because we drew another Fulminator Mage. So, great draw. Again, assuming they don't have turn 3 Tron plus payoff. So, let's see. The opponent goes Crack the Star, play a map, play a forest, play a sphere. Okay. We breathe a sigh of relief because they're not going to have turn 3 Tron here. And therefore, we have every reason to be optimistic. So we go Blooming Marsh into Dark Confidant, passing the turn back. Opponent will begin by cracking a sphere, looking for probably a Tron land before they use the map. Doesn't look like they have one, so now they'll use the map, go get a tower, and play a relic. So the opponents had a very, like, they kept 7. They're making all their land drops. They're having very efficient turns. They've played 4 1-mana spells in the first 3 turns. It's very nice for the opponent, but we have a hand that can really, really compete. So Bob will flip a Goyf, will draw a forest for turn. That's all well and good, and their relic is all well and good, but right now it's the Fulminator show, so we're going to hit the land that they tutored for and smash them for 2 with the Dark Confidant. So back to the opponent, they're going to relic us, and we of course try to leave the Fulminator in if we can, because we do still have Unearth around. Opponent will go Sylvan Scry and go get another Urza's Tower, so nice find from the opponent. And then they play another map, so again, you know, good stuff from the opponent. We flip Bob, and we draw Liliana. Or we flip Swamp with Bob, we draw Liliana. So, again, all of the above is well and good, but there's no way we do anything except Stone Rain them again with Fulminator. We'll get the Overgrown Tomb down painlessly, and we continue smashing for 2 and drawing 2 every turn thanks to the Dark Confidant. The opponent missed the ability to relic us off of the Fulminator. Maybe they're not playing around on Earth, maybe that's not going to matter, but it's worth pointing out that, you know, they could have been punished for that, but they weren't. We just had a natural Fulminator. They relic, they crack the relic, they pass back to us, but they're pretty far behind at this point, and we have the Field of Ruin to continue disrupting them off of Tron. So Bob will get in for 2. Then I do believe it's correct to field them here in the main phase, because that's the only way we lose is if they assemble Tron at this point, I think. We've got enough gas in hand that their hard casting ability, between the gas in our hand and the fact that we've Stone Rained a couple times, we're pretty optimistic about beating their hard cast threats. So here we could have gone Liliana, would have been a fine time to go Liliana, but I rated Duress into Tarmogoyf more highly. That is going to make our clock great, especially now that they've been forced to cash in their relic, and it's our way to get rid of any pesky hard castable catch-up cards like that Oblivion Stone. So the opponent's got a stacked hand, they've got yet more 1-mana spells to play, but I think O-Stone is the card we kind of have to take there. And, of course, Tarmogoyf is now a 3-4. We're rebuilding nicely after the graveyards have been exiled. Opponent top-decked a forest, so, you know, them top-decking a land is actually very good there. They just go Relic, Star, Pass. Their hand is, of course, really stacked. The big problem is they didn't have lands, and now they do. So, we just flip a couple lands for turn. We'll play the Liliana. We'll tick her up. We cannot quite have a double spell turn, which is awkward. It was worth considering, you know, maybe cashing in the Peat land to look for something else, but I think it's totally fine to just go on the Liliana plan and also plan to attack with Treetop Village, because, as I was about to say, the opponent's probably going to crack the Relic here. They clearly are in need of more action. They're going to buy a little bit of time against the Goyf. I think they might have cracked it at kind of the wrong time here. I realize that they're looking for more appealing things to pitch to Liliana, but at this point, maybe just pitch one of your big payoffs and then crack the Relic during combat, right? That's what I would do, because now we have grown the Goyf a little bit, only to a 1-2, but still could become relevant. In any case, it is the Treetop plan. We're smashing in for 6. And we might have lethal next turn if we can grow the Tarmogoyf, so we'll just see what the opponent does. Sylvan Scrying for Urza's Tower. Well, that's a little bit scary, because now they have Tron, and they have a payoff. Fortunately for us, they're just 1 mana shy of Ugin, so definitely still scary, though. And the opponent will play either Karn or Wormcoil, and it is going to be the Wormcoil engine. So, makes sense, but remember what I said in the deck tech about Kalidas being good specifically against Wormcoil Engine? Well, we've got him in hand. Abrupt Decay and Unearth are our finds. Those are all well and good. But the vampire will make an appearance, and then we get to Edict away the Wormcoil nice and clean. Here's the only downside, though. The replacement effect actually comes back to bite us in a way. Obviously, it's really good, but it does not grow the Goyf because the Wormcoil's not in the yard. We would have had lethal there, but we don't. However, it's still definitely correct to just attack with everything. The opponent does have Ugin mana. They can Ugin away our entire board, but unless they find a Ghost Quarter for our Treetop Village, they're just dead. So they play a land, and they are going to scoop it up. finally assembled Tron through all of our disruption, our repeated Fulminator mages, our Field of Ruin, and they resolved a Worm Coil. They would have resolved another payoff card here, but it just was not enough. We just curved out too well. We had too much advantage out of Dark Confidant. We had the mid-game setback of a couple Fulminator mages in a Field of Ruin. We had disruption of the hand and of the board from Duress, from Liliana, from Kalitas. It was awesome. So we take down Green Tron. We get the big brother in a nice, relatively easy 2-0. You saw 4 victories here across 2 rounds against 2 different Tron variants, and all 4 of the games played out pretty differently. So this was one of the reasons I was excited to show you this league, my friends. This is a really nice showcase of all of the different ways our deck can get there against Tron. I still wouldn't call it a favorable matchup or anything, and you still basically need to pack Fulminator mages. I would not leave home without 3 Fulminators right now. Just my opinion, but it's a one I hold pretty strongly. And of course the opponent can just nut draw you. Like, sometimes there's just not much you can do. But we didn't necessarily have perfect curve outs in any of these 4 games. We had reasonable ones, we had good ones, maybe, but not perfect ones. You know, we never surgicaled them off of Tron or anything like that, and we still got there kind of 4 different ways. So, feels good. This matchup is very, very winnable, but it's still one we've got to know how to face, know how to pilot against, and one we have to respect. But we advanced to 2-0 in this league, and I will see you for round 3. And here we are for round 3 on the play yet again, you know. 2-lander with a nice low curve with just kind of one thing above that 2-mana threshold. So it's painful, very painful of double shock land and a Thoughtseize, but it is a keep. Opponent has kept 7 as well. We hope we're not against burn. And then we see that we're against blue-white control, and we would rather just be against burn with a bad hand because it's blue-white. Matchup is generally a little bit miserable for us, especially, you know, ever since War of the Spark, they adopted all of these Planeswalkers, and opponent's got a nice functional hand, you know. They don't have they don't have much early interaction specifically on the stack, but they do have a nice low curve, some high-value pieces. So, speaking of the Planeswalkers, we just take away the Walker there, in my opinion. We don't care much about the Snapcaster Mage yet. And, of course, we have Nile Spellbomb to make that worse anyway. Vendilion Click can be very good against us, but in this particular window, I'm not convinced that I care about that either, so we just take away the Narset. Drawing a 3rd land is good. And we're just going to resolve our Grim Flayer and pass. Nice early proactive play, forcing the opponent to maybe come up with an answer. If not, we're going to get a lot of mileage out of this guy. So, opponent goes Plains and pass, and we draw another land. Let's play it, and let us attack. So we're going to get in with the Flayer, and the opponent is going to flash in the Snapcaster Mage and go for a block, and this is totally fine with me, because this is a 1-for-1 trade with one of their more effective cards overall against us. Their whole deck is pretty effective against us, but Snapcaster is just a really nice 2-for-1. So not only is it a clean 1-for-1 trade, we also come out ahead because we get to trample over the Snapcaster's fallen corpse for 1 and get our trigger. So pretty nice. Fatal Push is a card that I'm pretty happy to bin, even though there's a Vendilion Click in their hand. I still think it's fine to bin that. We bin the Blooming Marsh as well and leave Unearth on top. Unearth is actually pretty decent here, especially because we're going on the Liliana plan. So just going to allow us to empty our hand as quickly as possible and be very tempo positive while doing so, get value out of the aftermath of the Lily tick up and so on and so forth. But for now, we pick Nile Spellbomb. We get that Field of Ruin out of the opponent's hand and we pass back to them. Opponent goes Glacial Fortress, pass, holding up Vendilion Click and maybe other things. But we're just going to try to empty out our entire hand. We'll lead on Scooz. Scooz will resolve. We'll play Unearth targeting Flayer. That will resolve as well. Nice. Then we get to tick up the Liliana here. Might actually have been correct to fetch before we started doing any of this, just so that they cannot respond to our fetch by, doing something that we would otherwise be able to disrupt with a Scoos. Probably doesn't matter, but worth pointing that out. There is a tension, though, between what land to get with our fetch land if we just lead off on doing it, right? Because we would basically need to get Forest to do that, because we have both our tombs out already. And then we don't have double black, or we don't have triple black, which could become relevant, but very corner case thing. Just like to point these things out when we have the luxury of doing so in a replay. But in any case, the opponent loses an island to the Liliana. Then they will Vendilion click themselves, getting rid of a Snapcaster Mage and finding a new card. We are now delirious, by the way, with the Flare. Opponent finds the fourth land, but it's a Colonnade, so no Cryptic, no Verdict, at least quite yet. And they're going to send the click at Lily. She's down to 2. Passing back to us, we draw Dark Confidant, and we're just going to try to slam him because we're planning to still tick up with the Liliana. Just the asymmetrical discard effect is too good to pass up. And Surgical goes by the wayside. Fair enough. So in come the Scoos and the Flare. Just going to be really disciplined with the Scoos activation, No need to get greedy with the, eating a creature or something. And the Grimflayer sees Tireless Tracker, Liliana of the Veil, Inquisition of Kozilek, so I think Inquisition is a pretty free bin at this point, and I really like both of those other cards, so I decided to just leave them both on top. We still are at a high life total, and we're against a matchup where it doesn't matter that much, even though they do have a beater on board. We gotta respect that. I still think just drawing both of those cards is going to be able to get us out of most situations where the opponent could in theory try to come back from here. So opponent's pretty priced, I suppose, into getting the Liliana off the field, and that's exactly what they do. And nothing. So we'll just untap, we'll draw those 2 cards. We got Lily of the Veil, we got Tireless Tracker. First thing we'll do is move to attacks. There's no Cryptic tap down. We don't know what that last card in their hand is. We're going to put them down to 5. And we see a couple Inquisitions and a Blooming Marsh. I do decide to leave the Blooming Marsh on top because we're going to go Liliana this turn, and then next turn it lets us go Tracker into land in case something goes wrong. That's a really good way to rebuild if they find a Supreme Verdict for us here, to have a Liliana around and then Tracker into land. We could also choose to fetch the land away if we decided we need action instead, if something else happens. But in any case, who knows what the opponent's last card was, but they scoop with Liliana of the Veil on the stack, so oh boy, it feels really, really good to take game 1 off of blue-white control. I haven't done that in my last few meetings with the deck. As I said, the deck has always kind of been, not always maybe, but ever since I've been, really a dedicated BG Rock player, it's been an uphill battle for us, and it's just kind of gotten a little bit worse over time, worse and worse over time, because, they just keep getting new Planeswalkers to play. It all went downhill when they got Teferi of Hero of Dominaria and Jace the Mind Sculptor together in a pretty short frame of time, and then they've got new stuff since then. It's just tough these days for us, but it is beatable, and it is doable even in game 1s, and we just did it here. Really nice curve out from our deck. Again, I reiterate, the deck feels really, really strong. It hasn't felt this strong ever. Since I've been a dedicated Rock player. I really like what subtle changes Modern Horizons has brought to the deck. It feels really streamlined right now, and it can even take game 1s off of blue-white control. However, we still got the whole match to complete, so let's go to the sideboard and see how we configure for game 2. Alright, my friends, so against blue-white control, Fulminator Mage, he's been the number 1 sideboarded in card of this league by far thus far, and, that trend continues here. Choke, of course, the main reason Choke is in our deck is for this matchup, so in it comes Collective Brutality, very nice against the deck. Admittedly, a little bit worse, because now they're more Planeswalker heavy, more permanent heavy in general. They're a little more heavy on Vendilion clicks and Detention Spheres and so on than they were a little while ago. And of course they're more heavy on Planeswalkers, but still a good card, still worth bringing in. Liliana the Last Hope here, good grindy value, ticks up to kill click and Snapcaster, presents an alternative win con that they really have to deal with, and Duress. Duress, Again, something that's come in all 3 matchups that we've played so far this league. So, pretty free 5 cuts here. Fatal Pushes once again go by the wayside. Quick aside, remember how one of my, I don't remember which one, but one of my initial post-Horizons list actually only had 3 Fatal Push and 1 in the side. I have walked that back. I don't believe it to be correct, but my reasoning at the time is still holds true. This is one of the highest variance cards in our deck, you know. All 3 games this league so far, we've sided out all 4 copies. Just pointing that out, you know. I still think we should be playing 4 main deck, but worth bearing in mind as the deck evolves in the future, right? But in any case, Fatal Pushes can come out, and so can a land, and it should be Bluing Rush because they're a Path to Exile deck, so we leave in our basics. Now, I admit to not knowing the exact perfect recommendation here for what the last 2 cards should be. It's just a little bit hard to rate. Well, why is Tarmogoyf here? That's not it. It's a little bit hard to rate this. So, in the past, I've sided out 1 Scooz, I've trimmed a Scooz, but that's when I had 3. With only 2, I lean toward just wanting to keep 2 around. I think 2 is fine, and keep the threat density high. But it's worth considering maybe trimming 1. And then from there, Abrupt Decay, historically, we've sided out our 1 copy of against Blue-White. But now these days, they play so many 3-drops, permanents. I kind of like Decay in the matchup. That said, 2 might still be a little bit too reactive, a little bit too narrow. So maybe siding out 1 is pretty free. Let's just say siding out 1 is correct. We leave 1 in. Again, I could be receptive to alternative arguments. And then from here it's interesting because it's like, alright, Unearth, they're not putting much into our graveyard actively. Like, all of their removal basically, aside from Supreme Verdict, is going to exile or maybe put it on the bottom of the library or something, right? Nihil Spellbomb is a little bit more guaranteed to be good, but we just don't need that effect that much, whereas Unearth probably has a higher ceiling. Like, imagine casting Tracker into, like, in the late game into a counter spell and then just unearthing it immediately, getting a land to follow it up. So I don't exactly know what the very best 2 cards from these 4 to side out would be, but you guys know me, I like to hedge even when I'm sure that it's right. So when I'm not sure, I'm even likelier to hedge. So 1 Decay can come out, the other 1 can stay in, and then it's either one of these cards to cut. We probably cut an Unearth and just play with 2 Spell Bombs. They're just good against Snapcaster, good against a couple other things in the deck, and it's a redraw. So until we have more data on the matchup, or maybe until we see more specifically what the sideboard technology of the opponent's deck is, we would be looking just like this. Let's go to game 2. Well, we're on the draw against Blue-White, and I really like this hand. We've got 2 lands, neither of which are basics, 2 discard spells, 2 Dark Confidants, and an Unearth to round things out. I'm a fan. You can't pass up a hand like this. The opponent keeps 7, and unfortunately they do. If they had mulliganed, I would actually be optimistic here, but we're in for a slog, and the opponent's got a really nice hand. 4 lands, including the Colonnade, and they've got the Curve of Leak into Force of Negation, which they can hardcast, into Supreme Verdict. So, what do we take? Well, pretty clear take of Mono Leak, because we're just going to try to resolve a Bob, get a draw or 2 off of them, maybe force them to find a path, which still ramps us, or maybe just Verdict away a Bob. Definitely seems okay. So, and I think leading on Duress against Blue-White rather than Thoughtseize is correct, because yeah, you could make an argument for either one. Like, obviously, leading on Inquisition is correct. So, in the deck tech I showed you, I sided out 1 Unearth. Here, I clearly kept both in. And one reason I have decided to revise my opinion a little bit and side out both is just, this is very clunky, right? I think maybe I sided out a Spellbomb instead of an Unearth, or who knows what I did. But what I would advise is what I just showed you, right? But I think what I did in this match was just 1 card different. I sided out something, left in the Unearth. The good news for us is that we're untapping with the Bob. The opponent plays Field and passes. So we hit our 3rd land, beautiful, and we've got more Bobs where this one came from. So under certain circumstances, it can be correct to just really lean super heavily on the Bob and play around like narrow stuff like Condemn, or play around the Snapcaster flashing into trade. In this situation, I felt it better to attack, but definitely worth mentioning that. So we're going to go ahead and play a land first to play around Spell Pierce, then we will Thoughtseize. And the opponent's just hardcasting Force of Negation. So Force of Negation, cool card, and I accept their decision to keep the demarcation between Legacy and Modern pretty strict, right? I talked about this with my breakdown of the full spoiler, how I expected them to have more reprints and fewer modern playable brand new cards, but they weighted it very heavily toward the new designs. And I respect that decision, but one of the reasons I was really excited to see Force of Will in Modern, and instead we got Force of Negation, is that Force of Will would do an even better job of policing the degenerate stuff of the format, maybe kind of moderate the format a little bit to the point where we're not stretched so thin across so many extreme archetypes, and also Force of Will would be terrible against us, whereas as you can see here, Force of Negation is pretty reasonable against us, just hardcast, especially when they're on the play. So just a little minor aside there. So no point in playing out another Bob into Verdict, obviously. We'll just pass and make them have something good here. We don't mind getting this verdicted because that's a win for us on tempo and on card advantage, but they found a Jace, so that is the one thing I was afraid of. I would basically accept any other thing except the turn 4 Jace into Brainstorm. That's just awful for us. So big downfall of Dark Confidant. Even though he's amazing in the matchup, he cannot cleanly attack a Jace off the field in one hit. So not the most thrilled to see the Jace. We're going to aggressively cycle and unearth, looking for a way to kill the Jace. We find Nurturing Peatland, Blooming Marsh, Field of Ruin. So 3 draws, 3 lands. Very, very tilting, and all I want is to kill this Jace before he gets to untap. So I'm aggressively cracking the Peatland, looking for a trophy, instead finding a Tarmogoyf. So I chose to play out the Skoos here. I'm basically forcing them to Verdict. I don't want them to be able to just keep brainstorming the Jace while one-for-oneing my stuff. I want them to have to tap out and Verdict and just give myself the chance to, like, overload them again next turn, or find an answer to Jace while they're topped out, like a Pulse off the top or something. So, and we didn't have any other great plays that turn anyway, I guess. So, obviously, we're walking into the known 2-for-1, but there's my explanation for why I did it. I think it is at least reasonable, and if we're going to do so, I'd rather throw away the Skoos than a Bob or a Goyf. But we're not rewarded for it. We simply draw yet another land. So, despite all of our good early interaction and advantage and board presence, we're just kind of at the point where we're just throwing things out on the board and seeing what sticks. I chose to unearth there rather than hardcast 2 things because it just is a more mana-efficient turn. Plays better around any Grave Hate they could be packing, and, lets me resolve a Blooming Marsh, and next turn have more mana to operate with. The opponent's brainstorming again. They find a Celestial Purge for the Bob, and they find Teferi Time Raveler as well, bouncing the Goyf. So this was the nightmare. This is how the Jace can just snowball right out of control. But we rip a Tireless Tracker off the top. Again, not an answer to Jace. That's all I want is the answer to Jace. However, it is a pretty good draw in its own right. And we are going to try to make 2 clues, but the opponents just got, such an efficient progression here because they have the path as well. So that one hurts. Getting that tracker path hurts. And I'm just going to play another creature out onto the field, just going to make them keep having answers. And that was a nice, way to claw back some advantage there, don't get me wrong. But again, as long as the Jace lives, they have the inevitability. So Teferi ticks up, Jace is going to brainstorm them into another path to exile. Jace is just defending himself extremely well, what can you say? It's the best planeswalker of all time, many would claim, and even though some have said he's not very good in Modern, he's still looking pretty good to me. Pretty good against us. Opponent's going to pass to us and then draw step the click. We could crack a clue looking for an abrupt decay and decay it in a response, but I don't think that's correct. I think we just let it resolve. And the click takes away our Bob, so they've successfully fought through a big parade of Dark Confidants. And we're going to find an Inquisition. Might as well lead on it, I suppose. See what the opponent's last 2 cards are. One of them is Dovin's Veto. So, yeah, you know what? At this stage of the game, that's a pretty good trade for us. Inquisition can be a bad top deck. We follow up by cracking a clue, finding a tracker. Nice draw. Nice draw. And then we'll play a land, make a clue. And once again, we are far enough behind as long as their planeswalkers exist that we cannot play around Supreme Verdict. We definitely just want to slam both creatures there. Again, make them have something. So Jace will brainstorm to open proceedings, and they find another Path to Exile. Just too many paths. Then they're going to field us, hoping we're out of basics, and now we are. We have the final basic in our hand, which is never good against blue-white, but, that's the least of our problems, right? So the click is attacking us, getting the clock going. The fact that it's free to attack is a pretty bad sign for us, but we have a draw step to solve our problems, and we hit a Verdant Catacombs, so let's crack the clue, and it's an Inquisition. Just kind of running out of gas here at the stage where we've had a lot of good gas all throughout, and the opponent's just got Snapcaster Mage. It's just the value train just never stops with this deck. It just never stops. So Snap Path the Goyf. We'll play out the Verdant Catacombs because we only have one fetchable in our deck left. It's the other Overgrown Tomb, so we're going to go ahead and fetch that before we draw that too, right? So Teferi ticks up, Jace brainstorms again, and then their clock is pretty significant. So it's going to put us down to 5, put us down to 6. If we fetch, we're going to go down to 5, so maybe that's a reason not to fetch, but I'm just going to field the Colonnade even though I don't have a land to get, just use my mana, and then I am indeed going to get that land out of my deck. Like, the clock is not what's relevant. We just need an answer to their board this turn, or we're going to lose. We draw Nile Spellbomb. I could maybe have let on Inquisition there, actually, to clear the way, but instead we just lead on the Spellbomb. It'll resolve, so it's a redraw. We find Lily of the Veil. So now I'm going to Inquisition to clear the path, and we see Celestial Purge, Snapcaster Mage, Factor Fiction. Like I said, the value train literally never ends, so we've lost, but we'll make them play it out here because we're close enough to the end. So we take away the Snapcaster. We're going to Edict with Liliana so we stay alive. And then they've got Purge for her, but they've also got Factor Fiction for a nice pile, and that's enough for me. And, they've got a nice 5 cards. We get to see a little bit more of their deck. We do see they have Detention Sphere. They have Mana Leak still in there. So, yeah, we get to see a little bit more of their deck, and that is enough. So we're going to scoop to the Factor Fiction, and we were beaten by a Jace, clinging on for dear life at 1 loyalty, just brainstorming, 5 times? 5 brainstorms is a little bit tough to beat, I would say. And, at every turn, we made them have good, efficient answers. Like, at every turn, we made them do it. So, this is just why Blue-White controls a tough matchup, because they do have the inevitability, they do out-top deck us, and they can compete in the early and mid-game turns, which is where we have the advantage, and we have to kind of get ahead and stay ahead. So, feels bad. They just curved out pretty perfectly as far as I can tell. But we definitely made them have it. The deck performed really well. We just did not quite get there. But that is all right. We have a Game 3. Let's move to that and see how we do. All right, my friends, Game 3 on the play, and this is pretty amusing to look back at this replay and see this hand, because shout out here to Mike Kingsley, who is a very intelligent and regular commenter on the YouTube channel, and Mike is a little bit behind schedule with watching my leagues, I guess, because he just commented on ones that are a couple weeks old. I just was looking at his comments today, and one of them, he said, you kept a 5-land hand with Trophy and Liliana against blue-white control, I think that should have been a mulligan. And so today I was just reading and replying to that comment, and here we are keeping the same hand again. So I think the other keep was better because I had Treetop Village turn 1. Here I don't even have that, so it's just all in on this Liliana resolving and taking over the game. But here's the thing, like, I understand that it's definitely viable to mulligan a hand like this. I understand that, definitely no argument for me here. If someone were to say I would mulligan that, I would say, hey, fair enough. This deck is just, like, I feel just unable to beat it with a mulligan. With a mulligan. Like, really. We just kind of have to hope to get lucky with this hand. I think it's more reasonable to keep this and hope to get lucky with our Liliana taking over the game than it is to mulligan to a functional 6 that can beat their 7. I think they just have that much of an edge in terms of the trading and the value and the inevitability. I really do. It's also worth noting that our Liliana is likelier to either resolve or draw out a Force of Negation than it used to be, because my understanding of the blue-white decks is that they're a little bit lighter on stuff like Monolith and Dovin's Veto than they used to be, because they can only play so many negate effects. And of course, Force of Negation is a big part of the deck. So, yes, this hand is questionable, yes, it's all in on the Liliana, but we're really making them have the 2-mana discard, or the 2-mana counter. And like I just said, they are less likely to have it these days than perhaps they were pre-Horizons, right? So the opponent's topping with the Opt, never a good sign this early on, and they go Flooded Strand Pass. So, I mean, our draws have been medium at best. It's technically action. We got a Quagmire and we got Unearth, but it's still Lily or bust, and it might be bust because they're fetching in response. And they've got the Monolith. You know, we made them have it, they had it. Now we're just at the mercy of our own top deck, hoping the opponent doesn't have a perfect curve out. They go Island Pass, and we draw yet another land, so gotta cycle the Unearth looking for action. Inquisition is action, and if this was like a turn later, I would say maybe we should sandbag this and wait for other spells to use, to kind of have a turn where we force action through leading on Inquisition. But here, at this stage, it's early enough that I think it's correct to just Inquisition. And we see the Nightmare. Like, they never don't have the perfect curve, right? They've got the 4th land, they're going to have Cryptic or Jace or Verdict next turn, whatever they want, and they've got other forms of cheaper interaction. We take the path, because Spell Snare is a little worse when we just know to play around it, but yeah, pretty bad. And yeah, I mean, what are we gonna do? Like, think about mulliganing to 6. Like, even a good functional 6 with a lot of powerful cards, are we really beating the curve of Monolith into either Path or Spell Snare on turn 3 into their choice of Verdict, Jace, Cryptic on turn 4? I don't think we are, not unless we cheese them out with a choke, maybe. But they even have outs to that, you know, they can just let it resolve and bounce it or something. Or they just, if they have to let it resolve, they can bounce it later, is what I mean to say. In any case, we draw Tarmogoyf and we pass because they had one unknown in hand, which is this Factor Fiction. The only thing we had going for us is they didn't play the Jace, and they don't have an obviously great thing to do on the end step. And then they ripped the obviously great thing to do on the end step, which is just Factor Fiction. And it's just, you know, Force of Negation, Narset a few lands. We're just kind of done for. We gave them the Narset with only one land, and that's the one they take. Narset was the card I was a little more scared of, so that's why we split it that way. They do indeed play the Narset. And they find Teferi, so yay, Super Friends assemble. It's so great. So exciting. So end step, I'm going to go ahead and trophy the Narset. We know they have a Spell Snare. I'm pretty happy trading my trophy with a known Spell Snare because we've got to get that out of their hands sooner or later to resolve our Goyf. And this way they're trading with the thing that would otherwise ramp them. And it also clears the way for us to top deck something great and resolve it. And hey, you know, it's a Liliana of the Veil. definitely a pretty great top deck. So we'll play a land, we'll play the Goyf, we'll play the Lily, we'll tick up, we'll pitch our Swamp. I could have... So let's update the hand here. They played the Plains, they played the Spell Snare. They ditched the Verdict, and they've played this Island. So there's only one unknown in hand. I could have actually played the Liliana and ticked up first to maybe sequence a little bit better, but with that one unknown in hand, it can't possibly be Path to Exile, right? Oh, wait, it is. But either way, you know, they either have the Path or the Verdict. Our Goyf is not surviving either way, but it's just like, again, they just never didn't have the really nice curve out, right? So Narset will tick down. They were going to field us. They are going to play Jace, and here is the value train, looking pretty unstoppable once again. The Brainstorm goes off, and we top deck a land. So this is a familiar story by now. You know, they stabilize, they have the inevitability, and we kind of need some really good stuff off the top, and it's just a land. So they found yet another path off the Brainstorm. We at least get that out of their hand with Lily. But they're going on the Fate Seal plan. They Fate Seal to the top, and then they get the Super Friends all together. And just getting all the value in the world. We will fetch to ruin the Fate Seal, get our Overgrown Tomb out of the deck, and hope for something great off of the top of the deck, and it is a Thoughtseize. We'll tick up with the Liliana. Maybe I should have actually cast the Thoughtseize first, but at this point I'm just phoning it in. I'm just like making them... I'm just going through the motions that we're just not going to beat this. We don't have the Elder spell in our deck. You know, we're just not going to beat it. So they have the perfect thing to flash in response to Thoughtseize with our Lily about to ult, which is the Vendilion Click. So, you know, I'm just going to hit play here. We have lost the Jace Brainstorm, the Teferi tick up, the Narset stopping us from going on an aggressive tracker plan. We'll get some stuff done, though. We play a Tarmogoyf, we Edict with the Liliana, but then they've got Snapcaster Mage, and where are we? Well, even the client has had enough. Oh, I just scooped here, I suppose. Yeah, I think I scooped to Snapcaster Path. That was just enough for me. So, yeah, man, tough stuff. You know, you get your hopes up. You get your hopes up taking down Blue-White in a pretty comprehensive win game one, despite them having a good curve out, and you're like, hey, maybe this matchup's not as bad as I thought it was. And then this happens, my friends, then this happens. Blue-White is definitely the big question mark over our archetype right now, in my opinion. If their decks are not forced to pivot away from so many Planeswalkers, and pivot back to Terminus. Like, Supreme Verdict is worse for us than Terminus, in my opinion. I'd rather play against Terminus. So, Blue-White, again, was already tough, and the new builds are just extremely tough. Yeah. Spell Snare, Factor Fiction, like, every card is a beating. So, I'm getting to the point where, if their archetype stays the same structurally and just kind of tweaks within this structure of lots of Planeswalkers, Supreme Verdict, if they can afford to do that, then we might have to consider either teching really hard for Blue-White or just kind of punting it. And now, I don't mean fully punting it, because we'll still be able to cheese out wins with, like, Fulminator Mage, and they mulliganed and they're light on lands, or just like a Liliana taking over the game. Like, that win condition will always be live for us, but, like, playing cards like Collective Brutality, Duress, Choke, obviously they all have utility in other matchups, but we might eventually reach a point with Blue-White where we're just not dedicating any tech predominantly to it. We're just saying, we're either going to beat you with our traditional discard into Goyf into Lily curve with the help from Fulminator Mage, or we're not really going to beat you at all, and that's fine. Or we might need to tech even harder for this matchup. So keep that, you know, kind of fork in the road in the back of your minds, my friends, and let me know what you think about that. Now, granted, maybe the meta will change and they'll have to stop playing so many Planeswalkers that all draw cards, and so many 2-for-1s and the Supreme Verdict and all that stuff. Maybe. And then maybe we'll be able to have closer to a 50-50 matchup against Blue-White. But for now, it's a tough one, and they kind of ruined our fun here. So it was a good match. It was a close match. our deck did perform pretty well overall, I think, but we just didn't get there. So we fall to 2-1 in the league, but we're still doing well, still having fun. I hope you are enjoying this, and I will see you here for round 4. Okay, we are on the draw again here in round 4. The opponent keeps 7, and we're continuing on our theme in these game 1s of keeping a 2-lander with a nice low curve. The 2-landers are just a lot more appealing now than they used to be, right? So, our mana's a little bit awkward here, but it is a keep in a blind game 1. You know, not going to throw back a functional hand like this, especially on the draw. And the opponent goes turn 1, fetch Watery Grave, suspend Ancestral Vision. And I'm just like, when will my misery end? These blue control decks just, like, dedicated to dunking on us, it seems. Main deck Ancestral Vision, really. And then we see Ghost Quarter and just a bunch of blue-black cards. So right now my radar is for blue-black control, I guess, but Dark Confidant's kind of unusual in that, so don't really know what I'm against. Might be kind of in brew territory, but they've got a little bit of everything. I don't want to leave them with the Thoughtseize, but I think we kind of have to just take away the Bob. Like, just take away the Bob, because that way, like, there's no way that, like, we'd be really dependent on drawing an untapped green or black land next turn to stop them from getting the draw off of Bob. So leaving them with Thoughtseize is not ideal, but they take away Tarmogoyf. I really expected them to take away Confidant, or maybe Decay if they have more good targets for our Decay to hit, right? But they're going to get some mileage out of their Surgical Extraction, so that makes sense. And that is, gonna trade with us. Trade 1 for 1, gets the Goyfs out of our deck. So we draw Skoos. Yeah, might be okay in the matchup, but right now our hand's looking a little clunky. We really wanted an untapped land, didn't get it. So just play the Quagmire back to the opponent, and they're going to fetch a mountain. So this is a Grixis deck, and they suddenly have a young Pyromancer as well. So Pyromancer into Serum Visions. So yeah, this is Grixis Pyromancer, I suppose. And very, very nice turn for them. We get our untapped land just a little bit too late. Would have been so nice to have Bob last turn and then draw 2 this turn, but now we're priced into putting off the Bob for yet another turn just to hit that young Pyromancer. It's just a real problem card against us. Opponent hits their 4th land, and they've only got 1 card left in hand. They go get a Steam Vents, and it is Kess Dissident Mage. So, new tech from Horizons, definitely a really cool card. I made her the centerpiece of one of my draft decks, pack 1, pick 1, and it worked out pretty well, despite being maybe a greedy pick. I don't know how good she's going to be in Modern, but obviously these types of recursive value pieces are really good against us. So Kess is an issue, and we draw Unearth. Not the very best. We're going to go ahead and play the Skoos out, though. Kess's ability does not target, so it's not like we can respond to a trigger or anything, so we kind of have to proactively pick out the card we want them to have the least, which I guess is Thoughtseize, but they still get free Serum Visions this turn, and they get to resolve the Ancestral Vision. So this is just like a matchup that is a nightmare for us, it looks like. Just piles and piles of value. I really hate facing these super grindy blue decks, because we are kind of... And then there's a Kolaghan's Command, just another really nice 2-for-1, buying back the Pyro. We are kind of a deck that's trying to do a little bit of everything in the meta, like we're trying to police the linear decks, and we're trying to grind a little bit, but these decks seem like they're basically interested in just outgrinding us more than anything else, so I always feel a little aggrieved to face them, but... and our hand continues to be clunky, our progression continues to be clunky, all the way back in turn 2. If we had just hit this Field of Ruin turn 2 instead of turn 3, we would have had a Bob on the field this whole time, would have been a very different game. Sadly, it is not. We've not been able to curve out as well, and now we are paying the price for that. It's one reason I feel the deck is actually stronger, because even though I love creature lands, they are clunky in the early turns, and we don't need them as much now that we have all of this cantripping, and threat density for all intents and purposes coming from cards like Unearth and Nurturing Peatland. So not having to lean as heavily on the manlands is nice, but now the opponents just got absolutely everything. They're getting spells out of their graveyard every turn with Kess. They've got the Pyro, they've got the Elemental tokens, so I've just had enough. I'm just scooping to this. They've even got more cards in hand than us. We are thoroughly beaten, and it's a cool deck from the opponent, don't get me wrong. Kess Dissident Mage's Spice. I like the Grixis colors, I like the Pyromancer strategy, I like a lot of these other cards, but man oh man is this a tough one. So that was a brutal game one on the heels of our loss against Blue-White Control, but we never give up hope. So let's take a journey over to the sideboard and see what we can do against a deck like this. Alright, my friends, so what the opponent's doing is basically a Grixis Pyromancer deck that's heavily controlling, with Kess as kind of like a win condition, so it's a little hard to know precisely how to sideboard against it, so I'll give you kind of what my considerations were here. So looks like their mana base is pretty vulnerable, fairly greedy mana base, so Fulminator Mage is something I was happy to leverage. Liliana the Last Hope also seems like a slam dunk. Ticks up to kill Young Pyromancer or the tokens, definitely just a really good grindy value card against those colors specifically. So these four are absolute definites. They come in. Now, it is kind of a control/mid-range mirror, so we can cut a land and I'll make it a forest because they're not going to tax our basics much. We did see Ghost Quarter, but there can only be one or two of those, I imagine. Abrupt Decay is a card that it's kind of hard to know how to rate. I don't know if they play permission spells, really, or not, so I don't know how relevant the uncounterable clause is. And it's important to have a lot of things that can kill Young Pyromancer, but it does miss on Kess. We don't know what else they're playing necessarily, so I think siding out at least one is fine. I also think siding out at least one Lily of the Veil is fine, because again, she's bad against the Pyromancer plan. Scavenging Ooze is a card that I thought more about leaving one in, but if I am cutting a forest, it's a little lighter on green sources. They're a lightning bolt deck. It's going to die to the bolt. It's going to die to the Kolagin's command if it's not, if it hasn't grown by then. It's just pretty vulnerable, pretty clunky. I think we want to be a little more streamlined. So those are the four cards I liked to side out. Now, I could see a case for having any of these six cards come in. So again, to attack the mana base with Choke could be reasonable. I just don't know how dependent on blue they are. They seem like they're more of a Rakdos deck splashing blue, so I think Choke is viable, but I decided not to do it. Kalidas Trader of Get, it is kind of a mid-range deck, he's up out of bolt range, he's up out of K command range, and he does get good grindy value, but is he just a little bit too clunky? Does he just not disrupt like the Kess plan hard enough? So a little hard to rate, and then I could see maybe playing with one of these two, either Engineer or EE, both as good outs to the Pyromancer plan, and just in general, whatever else they might play low along the curve, they could be good against. So these four cards were worth considering, and then of course Collective Brutality and Duress both seem decent, but Duress specifically, it's like, okay, if I'm going to whiff on the Pyro or whiff on the Kess when I really need to take one of those cards, I don't know how I feel about that. Then on the other hand, you could say this is a little too mid-rangey to leave in all of our discard. Maybe we trim like an Inquisition or something. And do we cut the second Decay? How many pushes do we move away from? Do we cut a second Liliana? So a lot of moving pieces here. Very, very difficult, I would say, to figure out exactly what is best. But I decided that I rated Collective Brutality a little bit more highly than Duress, because this can kill Young Pyromancer, and it can take away all of the things that Duress can take away in this matchup that I've seen. Obviously, it's a little clunkier, but the life drain can be relevant too, so I think I like that. And then, like I said, I decided not to play with Choke, so from there, EE or Plague Engineer, I don't really know what's better. Maybe just Plague Engineer, honestly, because it leaves a body behind. It's kind of just better value. So these two cards I would strongly consider, but I haven't really seen that much of their deck. So if we cut a Fatal Push, and then here's what I did. I said, all right, let's do this. Let's side conservatively for game 2 because we don't know the nuances, the ins and outs of their deck, which is kind of in a bit of brew territory, and then we can maybe bring back these cards on the in game 3 if we can take it there and have a better idea of what exactly to side out. If there is a game 3, being on the draw, Liliana gets worse, I think that's at least one pretty free side out that we could do. So anyway, I hope that made sense. This is how I set up for game 2, and let's take a look at how it went. Alright, so we're on the play for this game 2. Both players like their 7, and yeah, it's going to be the old turn 1 Thoughtseize, and our mana's a little bit awkward, because we can't right now go turn 2 Flare or turn 2 Hold Up Decay, but it is still a keep, and we see the opponent has kept a 1-lander with a ton of firepower and 2 Serum Visions to kind of take them into their curve out, make them hit their land drops, right? So I thought for a really long time about what to take here. There is an argument for taking away Kess, because it's the top end. We have a Thoughtseize, maybe in the future we'll draw Inquisitions or Brutalities, and they won't be able to take her. And she's very, very good. Thought about taking the Brutality, because we have reactive cards in hand, and not only can Brutality kill the Grimflayer, it can also, if they decide to get aggressive with it, it can be a really nice 2-for-2. We could just take away Bolts because they're efficient early plays, and again, they kill the Flayer. Or we could take away a Serum Visions and hope to kind of mana screw them. So normally I would say that taking one of the 2 Serum Visions against a control deck is a little bit loose here because they're going to get the other one that we're probably unlikely to mana screw them. But again, I've kind of identified early on that their mana base appears to be a little bit greedy, a little bit demanding. So I went with the Serum Visions. Debatable line, but I do kind of like it. Obviously, they're going to do the other Serum Visions here to follow up, and they go 1 top, 1 bottom. We draw Thoughtseize, which is a pretty nice draw considering we can't have a turn 2 play of any other kind, and we see that they have found a Dreadhorde Arcanist off of the draw from Serum Visions, which is another repeated source of value. So it's just really hard sometimes to grind through all of these decks, but we do take the Collective Brutality for the aforementioned reasons. Even though they're not on black yet, we have to assume the land they top decked last turn with a Serum is some kind of fetch or shock, and indeed that's the case. So they go fetch, grab a Blood Crypt, play the Arcanist. It's a good proactive play. We draw Tarmogoyf, so admittedly we've had some pretty nice draws, because this allows us to go push the Arcanist, play the Goyf, and as much as I have enjoyed Grimflayer, the mana cost was repeatedly awkward here, and would have been awkward this turn. But fortunately we hit the Goyf, which not only is playable, but survives the lightning bolts in the opponent's hand. The opponent top-decked Ancestral Vision, so part of me is very tilted because this card's so good against us, but part of me is relieved they didn't hit a 3rd land. So now it is a race against time. It's a race against the AV, and we top-deck Liliana of the Veil, who is pretty decent, but again, is not like a long-term solution to anything because they do have that AV coming off suspend. Having said that, we still play her. Definitely better to play her than to play a Flayer that dies to Bolt, right? So we'll pitch the Decay. They'll pitch a Bolt, and we will get in with the Goyf. Ancestral Vision will tick down, and the opponent just passes, and we draw Fulminator Mage. So the opponent, I don't know if they play Permission, but I haven't seen any, really, I don't think, in either game so far. So I believe it to be correct to just jam this Fulminator Mage and see what happens. You could tick up the Liliana first, maybe, to try to get it out of their hand, but I decided to just cast it first, better inform my decision once it resolves, or does not resolve, as the case may be, but the opponent is just going to scoop with Fulminator on the stack, so clearly they don't have the permission, and clearly that is just going to end the game. They don't have an answer to the Tarmogoyf. They've got the Liliana doing work as well, so feels good. We, our take of Serum Visions, while not like a nailed-on 100% correct decision, is what won us the game, because their second serum found them the second land, and then they stalled out. The bolts couldn't handle the Goyf. They didn't have the mana to cast their big payoff cards. They got punished for playing this card, Ancestral Vision, which is very, very good on turn 1, but can even be too slow when found on turn 3 against a grindy deck like ours. And Tarmogoyf, what can you say? Tarmogoyf continues to be an all-star in the deck. Not to state the obvious, but it's worth reminding everybody just how good the Goyf is, you know? Lots of hype about Hexdrinker. It definitely doesn't replace Goyf. Maybe it's Goyf's 5 through 8, but it doesn't replace Goyf. So, anyway, we get one back against this deck that seems like a very tough matchup for us, and feels good. But we've still got game 3, so let's take a look at that. Alright, so here in Game 3, we got the bad news of a no-lander with the opponent keeping 7 on the play. We've got to ship it, and we see a really reasonable 6. We're curving Thoughtseize into Bobbin to this Liliana that we'll leave on top, so yeah, a reasonable 6. Any kind of mulligan in a matchup like this is not welcome, but we'll see if we can have the traditional curve out here. Opponent's going to go Watery Grave into Serum Visions, and top, very interesting, and we'll go Swamp Thoughtseize, and we see a hand with Serum Visions, Fatal Push, and Kolagan's Command. So it's a pretty nice, well-balanced hand. Pretty much a problem for us, but you know what? The opponent just waited a few minutes and then scooped it up. So I don't know whether the opponent had made a grievous error with their top, or whether they just, had to go or something. But in any case, they would have gone Serum Visions here, and assuming the top was correct, they probably had a hand flush with action. We had, however, Dark Confidant, which admittedly we couldn't really run out into the push yet, but we had the turn 3 Liliana, and they don't seem like a permission spell deck, so despite the mulligan, despite them having an okay hand, I actually would have been fairly confident leading on the Liliana unless they found a young Pyromancer right away. And then we would have to trophy it, and then who knows what happens from there. But assuming they didn't have the Pyro, I think Liliana is actually going to do pretty decent work in this specific situation. Having taken away the Kolagan's Command left them with some 1-for-1s that are not the very best against her. So we'll never know because the opponent scooped it up, but I'm not mad about that. We slogged through blue-white control. We slogged through the first couple games of this one. And it's not a good matchup from what I can see, but we did get there. We did take them to Game 3, and then the opponent just kind of scooped it up again. Who knows why, but maybe they just were tired of getting Thoughtseize. Maybe they are as unhappy about seeing our deck as we are about theirs. Who knows? But either way, we got there. We win round 4. And we are 3-1 playing for the 4-1, having already cashed the league. The pressure's off, but we want that 4-1, so let's go get it. I'll see you in round 5. Okay, 5th and final round of this Modern League on the play, and we like our hand. It's got the turn 1 discard into turn 2. Our choice of Goyf Flare. We like this a lot. And so we'll Swamp Inquisition, and we see the opponent is on Temple Gardens, Hallowed Fountains, and Cavern of Souls, with a Restoration Angel and double Remorseful Cleric in hand. So it could be Spirits splashing Restoration Angel. I've seen stranger things, but I would more likely identify this as kind of like a Bant Taxes deck. So we'll see how their progression goes, but these Taxes matchups, they can be swingy. I think overall we're fine against them, in the 50-50-ish range, maybe a little bit favored. But in any case, I am going to go with the Grimflayer early. Just feels like the more proactive thing to do given our hand. We kind of want to see more interaction, and we want to set up our land drops for Tireless Tracker. The opponent found a Watcher for Tomorrow. So this is new tech from Horizons. It's a 2-1 ETB tapped with Hideaway. So obviously some really good value can be found by blinking that with Restoration Angel and Flicker Wisp and so on. So that's what they'll do. We draw Blooming Marsh, alright. So we're curving out with our lands. Let's crack on in there with the Flare. And we see Verdant Catacombs, Inquisition of Kozilek, Maelstrom Pulse. Well, we don't need the Catacombs. We already have another one. And I kind of like both of those other cards. Even though Inquisition is not strictly necessary right now, it isn't nice to interact with this deck kind of on our own terms, and there could be Thalia taxes involved at some point, so it's nice to just have cheaper stuff, and Inquisition is still pretty good early on. Opponent's going to we play Tarmogoyf and pass. Opponent's going to get busy with the Watcher for tomorrow. It's kind of a free attack for them, I guess, because if we block, they get the card. I would rather have them do that, though, than sit back to block our Tarmogoyf, right? So I'm pretty happy to take 2. That's my first damage of the game. And indeed, there is a Thalia that shows up taxing us. So, unfortunately, even though Inquisition is efficient, generally speaking, it's not the most efficient right here, right now. And Thalia also blocks off our Grimflayer. That is very annoying. No way we can really get Delirium before attack, so we just send in the Goyf. Gotta leave the Flayer back, and gotta settle for the consolation prize of Tracker into Fetchland, making 2 clues, and, they can only play so many of the tax effects and so many cards in their deck. Doesn't look like Leonin Arbiter, but it's still always nice in case we're suspicious for the Arbiter to get our fetching done before he shows up. So we top deck another Catacombs, even though we bottomed one with Flayer. Seems pretty good right about now. And then we will go ahead in Inquisition. We know they at least have that Remorseful Cleric in hand, and we also see Flicker Wisp. So we don't care that much about either of them, but I think Flicker Wisp is the clear take. Like, Cleric shrinking the Goyfs is not that big a deal against us. It's a factor, but we want to trade away with their creatures. We don't care if they make our Goyfs temporarily worse to do so. This is more like a proactive, main deckable, hard, hate card against the hard graveyard decks, right? It's not particularly good against us. So we take the Flicker Wisp because that can wreak havoc with all kinds of things. It's not that dangerous without a Vial, but still, the better take. We'll make another pair of clues, and we'll get busy with the Goyf. Opponent's going to assign the block with Watcher for tomorrow, and then they're going to flash in the Angel. So, Angel blinking the Watcher is really good value. We are going to trophy away the Watcher because we just don't want to get caught up in this loop of, like, they just draw a bunch of cards they draw out of our card advantage right now. So they still get the value. They get a basic land, they get to assign the block and take no damage. They, get their Angel down and all that, but we have dealt with the Watcher. We have got the Angel out of their hand, so that is fine enough with me. And they're on the back foot. They've got to stay back and block. They don't play the Cleric. And they're going to draw step path our Tracker. It's a pretty good play for them. So we'll crack a clue. We find Unearth. Unearth is interesting. Nothing to target with it quite yet, but makes it even safer than it already is to attack with the Goyf, so that's what we'll do. No blocks, they just take it, so fine with me. We're just going to play another Goyf, and we will pass. Opponent finally runs out that Cleric, and they're going to attack with the Angel, so hitting us for 3. Gotta respect the Restoration Angel clock, but we've still got a nice high life total. Dark Confidant might be a good draw, but let's crack a clue, see if we find anything better. And we find Fatal Push. So that's actually really nice. It makes me just want to send in these Tarmogoyfs here. If they did not have 4 untapped lands, I would probably just push the Thalia and attack with all 3. But because they do, we're playing around them having more flicker effects and other tricks. And one trick looks like it's going to be shrinking the Goyfs with a sack of Remorseful Cleric, which is fair enough, and then indeed another Restoration Angel. So this is the type of, tricky taxes play that can really catch them back up. That's why Fatal Push was such a good draw. They're going to blink the Thalia, reset her, but we actually just don't care that much. We're just going to push the Restoration Angel. Our Goyfs are smaller, but they still outsize Thalia. So we'll go ahead and let them assign blocks or not, as the case may be. They do not. So we could just have dealt 4 damage and played our Bob and passed, and that would have been viable. But We respect the resto clock. We respect their ability to find maybe like another remorseful cleric and shrink our glyphs, and then our whole board cannot attack into Thalia. That's a way we could feasibly lose this game, is with, unlucky Bob hits and them just catching back up and clocking us with the Angel. So I chose to cycle Unearth before damage and put them to 3. Now we're at the point where, like, eventually even suiciding in with a bunch of attackers is going to get us across the line. So I do like that play, especially because they already exiled our graveyard. Unearth is probably going to be cycling this game anyway. Might as well do it then and there. Also worth pointing out the versatility of Unearth, even as a instant speed way to grow the glyphs. It is definitely a good addition to our deck. They've got a Reflector Mage, which is a nice play, and then they're just still in the defensive posture, passing back to us. So we'll crack a clue, we'll crack another clue, not finding much. We find a land, we find a glyph, which is currently locked out. So let's just run out of Bob. And unfortunately, we just have to pass, so they have stabilized temporarily, but stabilized they have. And they chip in for 3. They play a Breeding Pool, still 1 unknown in hand. Let's see what we can find off of Bob. We find Unearth, we find Spellbomb. Both a little suboptimal right now, but they're redraws if nothing else. So we're going to open on the Spellbomb, just because that represents, that like makes them second guess. Like, we can add an artifact type to our yard, we can get a redraw, we can get Revolt off of it. It's just going to complicate matters for them. Even though I don't have a great way to use it right now, it's just kind of nice to run that out and make them think. So we're going to run them out, make them think. They're just going to chump with a Reflector. Totally fine with me. Like I said, we didn't really have anything great to do with it anyway. So we are in the market for more action. We're going to dig with the Spellbomb. We just find another land, It's not the worst, but it's definitely not the best, and all we can really do is just roll out a couple Tarmogoyfs, which, again, admittedly could get us over the line because we forced a little extra damage through the previous turn. Opponent's last card in hand turns out to have been a Spell Queller, which they were very disciplined with, so kudos to them. But here is where I question the line from the opponent a little bit. So they attack with both, which makes me really nervous. Like, why are they attacking with both when the Restoration Angel and the Queller both block really well? And then so I'm like, what do they have to follow it up? But they just have an ETB tapped creature to follow it up. So I understand that line from our opponent. I do, because this is basically saying I'm just going to put 5 damage across and hope that you die to your Bob trigger. But we don't even have any 4-drops in our main deck anymore, so we just win, and they scoop when they see that we don't die to the Bob trigger. So I understand that line, because they're maybe thinking, okay, they could hit Kalidas, maybe this is my best out. But actually, as it turns out, with just what was in our hand, we were kind of digging. We would have had to cycle the Unearth looking for more action. Now, granted, we had Trophy as well, so we did end up with the interaction to fight through them adopting a defensive posture, and maybe that was correct, to assume that we had it, but still probably a higher percentage line from the opponent to just sit back and make us have something than just to turn everything sideways and hope we die to our own Bob trigger at 4, right? So don't want to take anything away from the opponent. It's easy for me to say that because I know the deck inside and out. They may not, and they played very well otherwise. So it was a good game. It was an interesting game. The Taxes matchups can be swingy. They can GQ Arbiter us out of the game, or they can have the perfect curve out that we can't compete with, or they can stumble and our card quality can just absolutely crush them. So they do get swingy. This was not a swingy one. This was a really tight game, a really interesting game, and we did get over the line. So that was a good game. It was well played, and let's take a quick look at the sideboard, see what to do. Okay, so against this Bant Taxes deck, now it's important, my friends, to sideboard against what you have seen. And I didn't see Ether Vial. That said, I do expect that they play it in a deck like that. We just didn't happen to see it there in Game 1. But beyond that, you can make an allowance for something like that. But what did we see? Well, what does that make us want to do? I think anything that kills small creatures is going to be good here. So even if they don't play Ether Vial, they do play a lot of 2-drops, so I think between Vial and the 2-drops, EE is fine. Damnation is obviously great. Kalitas is great. Plague Engineer looks like he's got a lot of windows to be extremely effective, and also plays very well around the blink effects. Like, they can blow out spot removal with blink effects at instant speed. Plague Engineer, yeah, not so much. You come back, he's still going to be waiting there for you. Liliana, the Last Hope, they've got a lot of X1s to kill. The game gets grindy. The only question mark is whether Collective Brutality is good enough, because we did not see Leonin Arbiter, and that's one of the major attractions to playing Collective Brutality. That said, it's still probably good enough, it's just not quite as good as the others. But, like, the must-kill 2-drops, like Arbiter, have to kill them on curve, we haven't necessarily seen them. So, those are the cards I'm looking at. I think these 5 are for sure. And because we also didn't see Arbiter, and because based on their land base and the other 2-drops we saw, I'm not expecting Arbiter. Here's an example of siding against what you've seen. I think we're safe to cut a land, and I think we should, because it's a very grindy, mid-rangey type mirror. I like shaving 1 Unearth. You know, we leave 1 in because it's tempo efficient, it's never really dead, but they're not putting that many things into our graveyard. It's not like it's a black Taxes deck with Wasteland Strangler and Fatal Push, right? So I think we can cut an Unearth, and I haven't seen the graveyard effect, so we'll cut the Spell Bombs as well. Then we have 5 other cards to consider bringing out, and since we have enough of those, let's just go ahead and say the second Brutality is fine as another kill spell. So we can cut a Liliana of the Veil, especially on the draw. That might make sense. We could also cut like one of these 2 threats. Ooze is a little underwhelming sometimes against Taxes variants, but Grimflayer. Note how outclassed Grimflayer was simply by Thalia, and by a lot of their other stuff too. When the board gets clogged up, Flayer loses a lot of equity really, really quickly. So, and then again, because it is grindy, we could go ahead and move away from a little bit of discard. So I think you want all 4 Lilianas on the play against a deck like this. You could trim 1 on the draw, but I think she's just that good that we're just going to play with all 4. And I think I'd rather have the second Scooz than the first Flayer based on what I saw there. That means we just trim away 1 discard. We're still pretty happy with all of our, most of our discard effects, but we get a little bit heavier on threats and answers, a little bit lighter on the bad top decks, and I'll leave in a Thoughtseize over an Inquisition just to hit Restoration Angel. So I think I'm pretty confident in this sideboarding, but as always, my friends, let me know what you think, and let's move on to Game 2. On the draw here, Round 5, Game 2 against Bant Taxes. The opponent likes their 7, as do we. We've got a nice low curve, that's the theme of this league. Our opponents have almost not mulliganed at all. I believe the Blue Tron opponent mulliganed once, and that's it. That's the only mulligan gift we've been given. And we've had to mulligan, maybe twice, I don't remember. But our hands have been fine too. We haven't had any nut draws, but we've had a whole lot of functional hands with a single turn 1 discard spell and a 2-drop threat, and sometimes that's all we need to really get going. So, opponent is indeed on the Aether Vial in their deck, and that's what they lead on. Plains into Vial. We'll answer back with Blooming Marsh into Thoughtseize, and we see, worth noting, the opponent does not have blue mana, it's double Plains plus Temple Garden. But they also have Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, Path to Exile, Restoration Angel. So what do we take? What do we take? Well, to me, the answer is pretty clearly Restoration Angel. It's just a really hard card for us to deal with. Complicates our progression so much in the mid-game. It's just a great answer to it. We don't care that much about the Thalia as of now. Like, we're curving out with our lands. She's not going to lock us out of casting anything. And we do have 2 Tarmogoyfs, which, number 1, are redundant. Number 2, will ramp us even further ahead of the Thalia. And number 3, they'll be taxing themselves to path our Goyf. So all things considered, I think Resto was the snap take there. Now here, it's worth noting what exactly I did rules-wise. So I think way back when I first started, like my first ever live recorded competitive league, I was trying to figure this out on the fly. I was new to the whole narration while playing thing. I think I got it wrong. I don't think I punted. I think I scared myself out of making this play because I looked up the rule and kind of misread it. But here's what happened. So I paid for Engineered Explosives with X equals 0. Then the Thalia tax applies. Sunburst counts the tax. So I pay for the Thalia attacks with a black mana or a green mana, doesn't matter, and then EE enters with 1 counter, because you paid 1 colored mana for it, and that is what Sunburst cares about. So again, you can cast EE for X equals 0, and then you pay the Thalia attacks, and it's going to enter with 1 counter. And that's exactly what we wanted to do, because, like, do we absolutely need to kill this Ether Vial? No, but it's a really fine way to slow down their hand to make their stuff worse in the mid to late game, and it's a good way to make our clunky progression mana efficient. So that's exactly what we did. Opponent plays out that Temple Garden, hits us for 2, passes the turn, and we are going to just play the Catacombs and plan to hit the Vial, but we're going to kind of wait for them to do something, and they don't. So we let them go to their turn, but we also don't want to let them get the 3rd counter on it, because then they might get to cheat something in that they otherwise wouldn't. So before that counter goes on, and certainly before their draw step, we activate EE, take care of the Vial. And again, it's just a 1-for-1 trade, but that's why I still like EE. Sometimes an early 1-for-1 that's really flexible is all you need to slow them down, and of course the blowout potential is huge. The outs to uncommon permanence is nice, even though we have other ways to achieve that. Opponent's got another Ether Vial, though, so, we've still slowed them down. It's still fine, but not ideal for us. But we'll fetch on the end step, just again, playing around the Arbiter, all that stuff. And I actually chose to Brutality away the Thalia there, even though it was a really clean window to go Tracker into Blooming Marsh, make a clue, and they would not have even been able to path us that turn because the tax of Thalia. So we would have gotten the clue and made them have a really mana inefficient turn next turn to deal with our tracker. So why didn't I do that? Well, just again because I'm respecting their ability to go land and then have Restoration Angel, and then from there on out my Collective Brutality is at risk of getting blown out. That's how highly I rate the Resto, and that's why I took it turn 1 with the Thoughtseize. That's also why I decided to just clumsily 1-for-1 a Thalia there with my turn 4. So we draw Kalitas, a pretty good draw, admittedly, and I almost cast him, but we know, they do have a path in their hand. So instead we're just going to go double Tarmogoyf. It's better against the path. It's also better against other things that they could have. Certainly not going to expose the tracker without a land to follow her up. So end step, the opponent's just flashing in the Resto just as a beater, just for mana efficiency, and I am so glad that I used my Brutality last turn, because that's how you can lose a game against Taxes. Don't be afraid to just take your guaranteed 1-for-1s against a deck like this. That would be my advice, and that's exactly what we've done. So they're attacking. Who knows what that means, but they get in for 3, and then a Reflector Mage. Very, very good play, admittedly. They get to bounce our Goyf, they have a path for the other one, but we draw an untapped land, which is actually a really nice draw. So our life total's getting low. It's a little tempting to start going, just kind of panic and play Kalitas, but again, we don't want to get Kalitas path. So we're going to take our value here, guaranteed value, tracker into land. The opponent does have the path. This we know. It's fine. It's not ideal, but we get our clue, we get another land, we've got all the lands we need, and then I made the executive decision here to Abrupt Decay the Reflector Mage just because our life total is nice and low. So, obviously hitting the Vial there is a concern, whatever is left in their hand is a concern, but it's just correct to kill the creature. Even though they've already gotten the value out of it, we're just killing the creature. And it's race mode now, the opponent could have some other action. And we draw Thoughtseize, so big question here, do we, don't we? I say we do. I say we just take the hand information, maybe get something out of their hand, or at least force it onto the field on our own terms, but this would have been a lot freer if it were an Inquisition. So in response, they vial in a Renegade Rallier with no Revolt trigger, and there's just a Plains in hand. So I'm kind of mixed feelings about that. Definitely would have been nice to actually get something, and they do get to get this thing down, but on the other hand, we know they're not buying anything back with it, which is great for us. So, mixed feelings about it, but all we can do now is just throw down the Kalitas. We're not going to attack with the Goyf because we don't want to just lose on board to another Reflector or another Path, and we just have to sit behind our fatties, get hit for 2, and then we get to take our turn. So we crack clues aggressively, looking for action. We don't find any more action. So let's just hope our Kalitas connects. And even if we don't have any kill spell, this is still pretty good. It connects very nice, so we get up out of instant death range next turn. We get to play the Tarmogoyf. Now we've got 2 blockers to sit behind. We've got the inevitability in the matchup right now. And then we're going to let the opponent go to their turn, but note their mana base here, so we are going to draw step, hit the Temple Garden, hopefully taking them off of green mana, which is relevant, even though they have a Vial on 3, and the opponent just scoops to that. So they've already seen their card for turn. They must have nothing good. They know that they're not beating this board, and technically maybe they could have played it out for another turn or 2, but apparently the opponent had seen enough, so that is good enough for me. Kalitas stabilizing us when we were at the very brink and would have lost to just Restoration Angel beats despite being ahead on resources to a pretty significant degree. So very, very interesting game. Another close game, another good game. Well played to the opponent, but we got there. We got there, my friends. That was our 4-1, and that was a very fun way to end it. Alright, my friends, so that was our league. That was our 4-1. It was a really fun one to play. There's lots of skill testing matchups, lots of close matchups. Unfortunately, our 5-0 dreams were ruined by the arch nemesis. Blue-white controls now the arch nemesis. Tron is no longer the arch nemesis. Our buddy, the Collector Oof, has seen to that. How good was the Oof against Blue Tron in match 1? And how good was Fulminator Mage against Tron in all these matchups, right? So I'm still really loving a lot of what's going on in our deck, everything that's going on in our deck, really. I also played another league off camera that had kind of a lot of non-games, but it was still a fine result. We went 3-2. So this has been 5 leagues post-Horizons, 5 positive results, all 3-2s and 4-1s. And I'm telling you, my friends, once we have a league where a couple of the opponents take heavy mulligans, and we get some more favorable matchups, I think we're due for another 5-0. So I can recommend to you that this list, and I think I seem to have exiled a Fulminator Mage from my sideboard. Let's fix that so we're not going into the next league with a man down. But I can recommend this league, the list we played in this league to you unreservedly. If you've got a local meta you're tuning for, then tune for the local meta. But if you're going in blind or if you're playing online, I think this is a really, really nice place to be. So let me know, as always, my friends, what you thought about what was going on here. Thank you once again to our brand new Inquisitor Rocky and to our brand new member of the tire list here, Erwin. If you're enjoying this content, make sure you smash that subscribe button on YouTube. We're closing in on 1,000 subs, and make sure you visit the link in the description below to see my Patreon page if you'd like to give back. Those are the 2 very best ways to help this channel grow. So thank you all so much for watching. I look forward to hearing from you, and stay tuned to the channel because we're always got another gameplay video coming down the pipeline for you. Thanks again, and I hope everyone out there has a wonderful, wonderful day.